Picture the bright reaches as my people first knew them. Pull back, far back, until the warm shallows of our home water are only a single glittering smear in the dark, one shoal of light among 1,000 others, all of them turning slowly in the current of the galaxy. This is where we lived. This is where we were happy. We are creatures of the sunlit layer. You and I, we were born in water you could see through, water the color of a held breath, and we built our whole civilization in the places where the light could still reach us. We traveled the bright lanes between the stars the way our ancestors traveled the warm coastal currents, always in company, always within sight of one another, never, ever alone. And then pull your eye downward. Below the bright lanes, below the warm shoals, there is a place where the light gives out entirely. We have many names for it, but the oldest and truest is the simplest. The Black Trench, a wound in the floor of the galaxy where the currents run cold and the pressure of the dark itself seems to lean against the hull of any ship foolish enough to descend. No shoal folk who went down into the Black Trench in the old days ever came back the same. Most did not come back at all. And every single one who returned told the same story in the same shaking voice, about the same thing waiting for them in the dark. They called it the Kraken. For 1,000 years, that name was the most frightening word in our language. Tonight, I am going to tell you what it really was, and I am going to need you to be brave because the truth is so much stranger than the monster. I am the deep archivist, and I have spent my entire life in the one room our people fear almost as much as the trench itself, the room where we keep the records nobody wants to read. So let me say the heretical thing first, plainly, before you can swim away from it. The Kraken was never a monster. Everything the young are taught about it is wrong. Every painting in every hall, every song the elders sing to keep the children from drifting too far from the shoal, every shutter that passes through a crew when the lights dim, all of it is built on a lie. Not a clever lie, not a cruel one. A lie told by frightened sailors who saw something they could not understand and did the most natural thing in the world. They turned it into a beast. Stay with me to the end of this telling, and you will understand the most terrifying truth our people ever buried, and you will understand why we buried it. I promise you it is worth the fear. Let me first tell you the Kraken you already know, the one in the songs, so that we can take it apart together. The Kraken of legend was enormous, larger than any dreadnought our fleets ever launched, a thing the size of a small moon hanging silent in the cold. It had tentacles, dozens of them in the oldest tailies, that reached out of the dark and wrapped around a ship's hull and squeezed until the metal screamed and the seams burst. It had a single eye that burned, a terrible cold light that would find you across the entire trench and fix upon you, and once that eye had seen you, you were already taken. And it had a maw, a great dark opening that swallowed ship's whole, crew and cargo and all, so that they were never seen again. No wreckage, no bodies, no distress beacon, just a ship that sailed into the dark and a silence where it used to be. That is the monster. That is the thing 1,000 generations of my people were taught to fear above all others. Hold that picture in your mind. Now let us turn on the lights. We will start with the body because the body is where the lie is easiest to see once you know how to look. Take the tentacles first. The witnesses were not lying about the tentacles. Ships truly were seized by long, articulated arms that reached out of the dark and took hold of the hull. But arms are not tentacles. Tentacles are grown. These were built. They were jointed in the way that machinery is jointed. They moved with the patience of machinery. And at the end of each one, for those few survivors who got close enough to see, there was not a sucker or a claw but a flat, padded clamp, shaped with great care to grip a hull without breaching it. And here I must correct the first and most stubborn of our exaggerations, because the songs have only grown worse with the centuries. No, the Kraken did not have 1,000 eyes. I have read every account in this archive. It had one. We will return to the eye because the eye matters more than anything, but for now hold this number. 1. The maw was real too, in its way, a wide, dark opening in the front of the thing, but a maw digests. This opening did not. We will come to what it did instead, and you will not believe me at first, and then you will be ashamed, the way I was ashamed when I first understood. Because the body of the Kraken, every horrifying piece of it was machinery. Which means the Kraken was a vessel. And a vessel, my friends, has a crew. This is the pivot. This is the thing our songs can never say, because to say it is to make the monster ordinary, and an ordinary truth is so much harder to live with than a magnificent lie. The Kraken was a ship. Inside it, behind the burning eye and the patient arms, were people. Not our people. Theirs. The ones who eventually told us gently what we had spent 1,000 years being afraid of. They called themselves humans, and the thing we called the Kraken they called, of all the small and humble things, a tender. A rescue tender. It had a name painted on its flank that no terrified sailor of ours ever lingered long enough to read, and the name was the cormorant, after a diving bird from their homeworld that plunges into dark water and comes back up with something living in its mouth. Its captain, across most of the years that matter, was a human named Helen Mercer. There was an engineer who walked outside the hull, into the trench itself, in nothing but a suit, a human named Ishan Rao. And there was one whose whole job was to listen, to sit in the dark with the receivers and wait for the sound of someone dying, a human named Marisol. 3 names. Hold them because nobody else ever did. Now you are asking the question every shoal folk asks at this point in the telling, and it is the right question. How? How could anyone live down there? You have to understand what the Black Trench does to a body like ours. The cold is the first thing, a cold that our kind cannot survive without sealing ourselves into a bright, warm vessel and never, ever opening it. Then the pressure of the deep, which leans on a hull until the bravest captain can hear his own ship complaining in the night. And then the dark, the total dark, the absence not just of light but of the comfort of other lights, the thing that drives a shoal creature out of its mind. Our crews who descended into the trench did not die of the cold or the pressure as often as they died of the solitude. They came apart. They forgot they were many. They drifted. The humans went into that same dark and they did not come apart, and that is the part we could never forgive them for in a way because it made our terror look small. They went down into the trench the way a worker goes to a difficult job. They complained about the hours. They argued about the food. Ishan Rao kept a list, the records say, of every part of the cormorant that was held together with tape and stubbornness, and the list was long, and he was proud of it. They treated the most frightening place in our entire mythology as a shift to be gotten through. That was the first thing about them that frightened me more than the monster ever had. So how did they see down there where we were blind? This is where I keep my promise and return to the eye, the burning eye, the cold light that found you across the whole trench and fixed upon you so that you knew you were taken. Brace yourself. It was a lamp. The single eye of the Kraken, the thing that has terrified my people for 1,000 years, was a searchlight. The humans, you see, could not see in the dark any better than we could. Their eyes are weak, weaker than ours in many ways. So they did the obvious thing, the thing we were always too frightened to do, which was to make their own light and point it into the black and look. The reason the eye seemed to find you, the reason it seemed to fix upon you with terrible intent, was that it was searching, sweeping, looking for exactly the thing it found, which was you. It was not the gaze of a predator selecting its meal. It was the desperate, methodical sweep of a lamp held by someone who is afraid they will not find you in time. And I am sorry to do this to the songs, but while we are here, let me put down the other exaggerations too, because they have gotten out of hand. No, the Kraken did not breathe fire. Those were maneuvering thrusters. No, it did not have 100 arms. It had 4. And no, it did not sing to lure ships to their doom. I will explain the singing because the singing is the saddest part of all, but not yet. Here is the singing, and here is how the Kraken found you. And I warn you that this is where the story stops being frightening and starts being something worse, which is unbearable. Our sailors always said the same thing about how the Kraken hunted. It never came for a healthy ship sailing in formation. It came when you were alone. It came when your engines had failed and your lights were dimming and your distress beacon was crying out into the dark with no one to hear it. It came for the crippled, the lost, the ones already half given up. And we took this as proof of its cruelty, the way a scavenger takes the weak. We had it exactly, perfectly backwards. The Kraken came when your beacon was crying out because it was listening for exactly that sound. That was Marisol's whole job, to sit in the dark and wait for the frequency that meant a ship was dying, and when it came, to turn the cormorant toward it and go. The singing the old songs describe, the eerie call that seemed to come from the monster itself, was the humans answering. They would take your own distress signal and send it back to you, amplified, modulated, so that a frightened crew drifting in the dark would know, in whatever small way, that something out there had heard them and was coming. It was meant to be a comfort. We turned it into the lullaby of a thing that wanted to eat us. The Kraken did not hunt the weak. The Kraken came because you were dying. Not to make you die, to stop you. And now the taking, the worst of all the old stories, the one that ends every telling with a child pulling closer to the shoal. The Kraken seizes the crippled ship. The great arms come out of the dark and take hold of the hull. The metal groans, a long, awful sound that the survivors could never describe without trembling. The crew is dragged toward the maw, toward the dark opening and pulled in, and the ship vanishes. Every word of that is true, and every word of it is a rescue. The arms came out of the dark and took hold of your hull because a ship with dead engines cannot hold itself steady, and you cannot bring a frightened crew across open space between two drifting vessels without first making the two vessels one. The clamps were padded so as not to breach a hull already failing. The groan of metal, that terrible sound, was the sound of a dying ship being held, finally, by something stronger than itself, the strain of a toe taking up the slack. And the maw, the dark opening that swallowed crews whole, the thing we were most certain meant our death, was a hangar. An airlock the size of a small ship, kept dark on the outside so as not to blind the very lamp they needed to work by. They pulled your crew in not to digest them, but to get them out of the cold before the cold finished the job your engines had started. The dragging into the dark was the dragging into the only warm, bright, breathing place for 1,000 miles in any direction. We screamed the whole way in. They had learned, the records say, to expect the screaming and not to take it personally. So where did the ships go? This is the mystery that built the monster in the end, because here is the thing no song can get around. The taken ships were never seen again. We told ourselves they were eaten because there was no other explanation we could bear. No wreckage came drifting back to the bright lanes. No bodies. No final transmissions. A ship sailed into the edge of the trench, its beacon cried out. The eye found it, the arms took it, and then there was silence forever, and silence is the most fertile soil a monster can grow in. But the ships were not destroyed. They were towed slowly, patiently, across distances that took the cormorant weeks of crawling through the dark, to a station the humans had anchored deep in the trench where no shoal folk would ever think to look, because no shoal folk would ever go that deep on purpose. There they kept the rescued crews alive. They warmed them. They fed them food the humans found bland and our survivors found strange, and which kept them breathing all the same. And here is the cruel mechanism by which the legend fed itself. The rescued were so deep, so far from the bright lanes, that the humans could rarely return them home. The trench was too vast, the tender too slow, the journey too dangerous to make twice for one load of frightened strangers. So the rescued lived out their days at a human station in the dark, alive, fed, safe, and utterly unable to send word home. And to everyone they had left behind in the light, they had been swallowed by the Kraken and were gone. Every life the humans saved became another story about a life the monster took. The more good they did, the more terrifying they became. They could not win, they never tried to. So let me now tell you the truth we buried, all of it, the truth I have spent my life sitting on top of in this cold, quiet room. The Kraken was not a fleet. It was not an army. For most of the years that matter, the Kraken was one ship, the Cormorant. One small, badly maintained, tape-end stubbornness rescue tender with a crew you could count on the fingers of one human hand, crawling alone through the most frightening place our people have ever imagined, decade after decade, pulling our dying out of the dark. They did not do it for trade, because we had nothing they wanted. They did not do it for glory, because we never even learned their names. They did not do it for thanks, And this is the part that I had to read 4 times before I believed it, because for most of those years the people they saved did not know they had been saved. We woke in their warm, bright station certain we had been devoured, certain the monster was keeping us for later, and we hated them with the whole of our hearts even as they kept us alive. They knew that. The records show they knew that. Helen Mercer wrote it down in the plain way humans write down unbearable things. She wrote that the rescued were always afraid of them, always, right to the end, and that this was simply part of the work, the way the cold was part of the work, and you did not stop going down into the dark because the people in the dark were frightened of you. You went down because they were down there and someone had to, and no one else would. And it cost them. I will not let the telling end without that, because we owe them at least the honesty of the price. The trench took humans too, not as easily as it took us, but it took them. There are gaps in the cormorant's records, long ones, where the handwriting changes because someone new was keeping the log, and you learn to read those gaps the way you learn to read a grave. Ishan Rao, the one who walked outside into the dark in nothing but a suit to free a tow cable or patch a hull, did not come back from one of those walks. The log notes it briefly and then goes on, because the work went on, because somewhere out in the black another beacon was already crying. Helen Mercer captained that ship until she was old, by their reckoning, and old in the trench is not very old at all, and when she could no longer do it, another human took the chair and pointed the lamp into the dark and went looking. They burned through their own lives doing this. And the only reason I can think of, the only one that survives every reading, is the one Mercer wrote near the end, almost embarrassed to be writing it. Someone is out there in the dark. We have a ship that can reach them. That is the entire argument. There is no more to it than that. They went because going was possible and not going was not something they could live with, and they paid for that the way you pay for everything that is worth anything, slowly and in full. So now you know what I know, and you will carry it the way I have carried it, and I am sorry for that, and I am not sorry at all. The monster that haunted every sailor of our people for 1,000 years, the beast in the deep, the thing in the dark with the burning eye and the reaching arms and the swallowing maw, was the only thing in all that dark that ever came to save us. We saw a rescuer and we made it a devil, because a devil was easier than the truth, and the truth was this. We were afraid of the dark, and so we never went into it, and so when our own went missing in the deep, we let them go. The humans were not afraid of the dark, or they were and went anyway, which is braver, and so they went down after our dying when we would not, and we repaid them by turning their searchlight into an evil eye and their open hand into a maw. We owe the dark something now, all of us, now that we know what was living down there. We owe it our courage, the courage we did not have. And I will give you one last correction, the most important one, the one I have been saving, because if you take nothing else from this telling, take this. The thing in the black trench did not have 1,000 eyes. It had one, and it was not looking for prey. It was looking for you. It was always only looking for you, sweeping that single patient lamp across the cold and the pressure and the endless dark, hopping against everything to find you before the dark did. We gave that light the worst name in our language. We should have called it the only thing it ever was. We should have called it a friend.